Hi, Professor Moran. So, first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to submit my final thoughts after the fact. So, my approach to this final is going to be to, first of all, fill in one of the gaps. So, to answer some of the questions on the discussion that weren't already answered by someone else, and also to respond to one of my peers. Which is, to fill in for missing that discussion on Thursday. So I'm actually going to start off with my reaction. I have just been reading a lot of Nietzsche and engaging with Nietzsche for the short essay 3. So I thought it was intuitive to engage with Kobe, who answered the questions that we had on Nietzsche in the discussion. So he says that the reason that there's no literal language is that all language is metaphorical. So the way that I saw this is like in my own essay, how I talked about how I started to paint pictures, literal material pictures of the thing itself, or the way that I envisioned the thing itself in my own head. There's metaphors for the way that we interpret the world, like the snake slithering and the way that it's shaped, and how the letter S even relates to all of this, and how all these coincidences kind of exist in order to shape the way that we perceive things and the way that we express ourselves. So in his second point, he says that that Nietzsche wants us to stop pursuing knowledge by categorizing and conceptualizing things, and instead he wants us to embrace myth and art. And then he talks about the rational and intuitive man, about the ancient Greeks, and he poses a question about why is experiencing the novelty in every situation beneficial per Nietzsche. And so I wanted to tackle that through my own perspective. So I talked about innovation and how that applies to success. So it's not just playing by the rules and following these disciplines and acknowledging that there's a science and a logic to the world, but also to try to find some novelty or innovation in those rules to create something new for society to improve. Then I thought it was really interesting that Kobe went into tied this novelty to man being an artistically creative subject, because it's really important as an artist, not just to me, but to any artist really, that not only if what you're doing has been done before, what are you bringing to the table, and what perspective are you adding to make people actually drawn to your art, and what is your art really saying? Does it have anything to say? And if it doesn't have anything to say, then why is that? So I think there's a depth in art that sometimes gets missed in the superficial sort of everyday life that most of us go through, especially if art isn't a particularly big part of your life. And so yeah, I wanted to respond to that from my perspective. Then on the topic of myth and art, I'm going to go into some of Plato's myths in the Phaedrus. There's quite a lot of them. It's packed really full with Greek mythology, but I'm going to discuss like 3 of the main ones, or just big ones that I saw in the text overall. So the first one that I saw was Boreas, and then I'm also gonna tie Typhon in with that. So I think he mentioned this very intentionally, because he's talking about someone taking someone else to love them against their will. And so, as the other question poses, love is a big theme in this text. And so he is kind of posing this as an example to what that might look like. I wasn't sure why he was using this metaphor, because at first he was arguing that you should love someone who doesn't love you back. And in this case, the myth is like, oh, hi Tom. It's my cat. But the myth is an example of why that's a bad thing. And so it didn't click until I saw him talk about Typhon. He says, "Am I a beast, more complicated and savage than Typhon, or am I a tamer, simpler animal with a share in the divine and gentle nature?" So he is basically encouraging Phaedrus, and therefore the reader, to use these myths as a tool, as a story to reflect on of sorts, even if you haven't gone through the same experience. The second major myth that I want to cover is the Palinode. And so this is the poem that was written by Stesichorus, one of those two, when he lost his sight for speaking ill of Helen. And so Plato is using this poem in the Phaedrus in order to purify himself from having spoken ill of love. And so these kind of retractions set him as a bit of an unreliable narrator. He's sort of like discrediting himself, but he's giving up this reason, or this way of thinking to the divine, that this is sort of a divine inspiration that is being conveyed through him. And so last but not least is the myth of the charioteer, and this is the one that we discussed most thoroughly in class. So this is the myth which divides the soul into three ruling parts. So that's the love for wisdom, love for honor, and lust, or what is called the appetite-loving part of the soul. And so the wisdom-loving part is portrayed as the charioteer himself, and then he controls two powerful horses. So one is the unruly horse, which is lust, and then one is the noble horse, which is the love for honor. And so here in the Phaedrus, Plato is trying to use this myth in order to teach his student about how he should operate and how he should move forward when discerning who to love. And that it should be whatever his little chariot leads him, as long as he does so in a prudent and thoughtful way. So he knows the different kinds of horses under his command, and he should understand how to control each of them.